My next guest on the Quantum Shift podcast is someone who helps people rewrite the stories they live by. Luke Chow is a clinical hypnotist and the founder of the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis in Toronto, Canada, where he spent nearly 2 decades guiding clients out of anxiety, self-doubt, and limiting beliefs. Not with magic, but with grounded, rational, beautifully simple ideas about how to live well. Luke's approach is refreshingly direct. His work has helped thousands of people step into confidence, calm, as well as personal agency. This conversation is an invitation to think differently about your mind, what's possible when you stop letting old stories run the show. Enjoy. Luke, welcome to the Quantum Shift podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Very cool. So I know that we're gonna get into hypnosis and your business and all that exciting stuff, but I'm really curious that you as a business owner, entrepreneur, what drew you to hypnosis? Like, was that curiosity, personal struggle? Can you share with the audience what that was?
A little bit of the above, and then a little bit of my clients choosing me. So it's kind of like no one can choose to be a rock star or a best-selling author. You kind of have to create work that the public decides they want more of, right? So initially, I first started reading about hypnosis in my teens because my parents moved around a lot when I was a kid. So books were my friends. And out of all the books I read, many of them were books about how to be a happier person, how to have more peace in life. So, philosophy, psychology, self help. And somewhere in there, I read about hypnosis. And the adolescent fantasy is if I could hypnotize people, I can get my parents to stay in one place and not move me around all over the place. And of course, that's sort of the adolescent fantasy because hypnosis requires two participants, the hypnotist and the person being hypnotized. So eventually I got my degree in English literature, which famously has no obvious career path afterward. But the university promised that they would teach us how to think and communicate for a living, and I decided to hold them to it. So I tried my hand at freelance writing. I tried my hand at photography. And after coming back from a meditation retreat and having previously been certified, I tried my hand at hypnotherapy, and it seems like the market was telling me at the age of 23 that they don't want me to write. They don't want me to do photography. They want me to do hypnosis. So
You were
in about half
baby though. You were 23 when you got certified for hip.
was well, it was actually 21 when I graduated, and then I got my certification in hypnosis later that year. But then I kind of worked some odd jobs. I tried some freelance writing. And it was after I took a meditation retreat in 2006 at the age of 23. 2 weeks after I returned, I rented out my first office, which is half a block that way. And I was there for 16 years. Then three years after, 3 years ago, I moved into this space, which is going to be my forever office.
I mean, it's very cool though, as a young person to be able to find your calling. What was it about that retreat? Was the retreat? It was a meditation retreat. Was that sort of?
It was. It was, if you know S.N. Goenka's 10-day Vipassana meditation retreats. So it was one of those, donation only. So uh, they teach you how to examine yourself, how to introspect, how to be with your breathing, your thoughts, your feelings, and anything else that bubbles up from the psyche, and then to observe that. So I worked through, I think, a lot of my earlier life trauma that way. It's not like a mental health retreat, it's a meditation retreat, but I just still, the stuff that came up was stuff that I was able to process in a quiet place away from the rest of civilization. So when I returned, I was as close to fearless as I'd ever been in my life. Because all those usual voices about you're going to fail and they're not going to like you, all of that went away. And I was with my own thoughts. And being with my own thoughts, I decided, well, other people do hypnotherapy professionally, and no one's paying me to write. I mean, people paid me to write for them, but not very much. So I rented out that space. I put up a website. These were the early days of Google Ads. So I was, using Google Ads in 2006, and that's an advantage I had back then that no one would have today because they're bidding against the well-funded incumbents. But I was probably the first person in Toronto putting out Google Ads for hypnotherapy services. Um, so then the customers chose me over and over again, and that's how the practice grew.
All right. So I'm so intrigued by that. So obviously you're very smart. You have a degree in English literature. You're doing freelance writing. Go on a meditation retreat. You say, wow, I've got some peace here. This is interesting. You get certified as a hypnotherapist. You run these ads. What did that client base look like? Like who was coming to you?
Well, similar to my client base today, except today I have many more lawyers. For some reason today, my people are lawyers and executives. Back then it was more diverse, but often I would have clients who were literally three times my age or twice my age. But for some reason, they saw the potential in me to talk them out of their distress or to talk them out of their bad habits. So I give a lot of credit to those earliest clients who took a chance on a 23-year-old, a 24-year-old, a 25-year-old, because without those earliest clients giving me a chance, just like an author who has no readers, I wouldn't have a career. Nowadays, of course, people choose me because of the experience, because I can articulate what I'm going to do before I do it, and I'm not figuring it out as I go along. But back then, they really just had to trust that the certificate on my wall was good enough, or this English lit grad, because a 4-year degree takes much longer than a hypnotherapy training certificate. So they had to trust between a combination of those things that I would know what I'm doing, and um, it turned out that I guess I found my calling.
So I'm so curious because I've never gone to a hypnotherapist. I'm assuming that many of those clients had something they wanted you to, a bad habit you wanted them to break, whether that be smoking or drinking too much or whatever that might be. Um, do you need to have somebody that is very much willing to be hypnotized, or do you feel like you can hypnotize anyone if they're sitting across from you? Because it have to be somebody that embraces the fact that, you know, um, I believe that there is a subconscious mind. Because if somebody says, "I don't believe in a subconscious mind," then you're how do you work with that person?
So interestingly enough, throughout this entire conversation, you're probably never going to hear me use the word subconscious. You're probably going to very seldomly hear me use the word unconscious or out of conscious awareness at all. And that's because I don't actually know how to talk to only a person's unconscious or subconscious or out of conscious awareness without also speaking to the thoughts they're fully cognizant of. So, in other words, I'm speaking to a whole person. The thing you might have heard or read that we talk to the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind, that's, I think, kind of an oversimplified explanation that's totally unfalsifiable. Um, the thing I know is I'm talking to an entire human being and they have a rational mind. They have emotions. They have memories I can stir up with words. They have hopes and dreams I can stir up with other words. So I actually endeavor to speak to the whole person. And that I know I can do. And then we don't get in this messy conversation about, did I really speak to the unconscious mind? Because, anything as vaguely defined as that, you can't really use it as some kind of success metric.
So I guess that that's a good segue into what are some of the misconceptions that people have about what you do. I think that you're on stage and you're working with people like.
So on stage, even the crazy things you see people do are being done with the full consent and knowledge and willingness of the people who've literally volunteered to put on an entertainment show. So I think hypnosis gets a reputation for mind control because, well, my friend would never bark like a dog. S- Except when they volunteer for a show, knowing they're going to be expected to bark like a dog after volunteering. With that asterisk, yes, your friend would bark like a dog. Um, so stage shows kind of give hypnosis this reputation for we make people do things against their will, or that we put people in fantasy worlds, or that there's something odd or mystical or very out of the ordinary about hypnosis. In an office like mine, there is no audience. Even if I told my client to bark like a dog, well, they haven't consented to that. They haven't shown up for that. And there isn't their friend sitting in the audience clapping and drinking a beer while they bark like a dog. So, because of the lack of any social pressure to perform, my clients here have a very internal experience. On the outside, they look like they're asleep or they look like they're meditating. Very little is visible on the outside, but the inner experience is a much richer one where I want my client to kind of to use their mind body connection to cause themselves peace, empowerment, comfort, self love, self respect, self care. And these are not fantastical things. These are very ordinary things that I hope every human being finds during the long journey of their life. The very lucky few got from the age of like 3, 5, 10 guidance in how to be self loving and peaceful and self respecting alongside with loving and peaceful among others. But the rest of us, most of us, have to learn in adulthood. Um, and often, well, you might go to a therapist, and your therapist will want you to arrive at your answers. They'll listen, they'll facilitate, but they have a kind of professional prohibition from being very directive or definitive with how the client ought to think. And then you go to your doctor and they give you a molecule for the brain and they can adjust how many of those molecules and which molecule they're going to put in your brain. And then if you try to find a philosopher in the town hall, they're more likely a crank and they'll take your coins for no reason. So, where can you even go to get clear, specific, directive guidance for how someone thinks to sleep well at night after turning off the evening news? Right. So, like I sleep pretty well after turning off the news or after I stop reading the news, not because I lack heart, but because I'm clear about, well, here's what is in my control, and here's what I am culpable for, and here's everything else that's not in my control, and here's what I'm not culpable for. So when I give a client similar moral clarity, they also sleep better at night. If someone's a jerk to me, I don't really have to drink alcohol because someone else was a jerk to me. I have clarity. They're the jerk. I'm just going to wait for them to come to an apology and then I'll be here to receive their apology, but I have nothing to apologize for. So I'll just, chill.
It seems as if it's almost used to be potentially just a supplemental aspect of somebody's self-care compared comparatively to almost any sort of psychotherapy or, whatever their meditation. I'm curious, typically, how do you work with your clients? Is it a one-off? Is it, hey, cure me from smoking, or do they come in weekly like they are working with a therapist, or is it all of the above?
Well, you might have heard the term K shaped economy or K shaped recovery, where it seemed like a few years ago, or maybe even going back before then, the economy bifurcated and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And I've tried to kind of cater to both prongs, both legs of the K-shaped economy. So, um, my clients who are in a better financial position, they would do an intake with one of my staff members. We're going to ask them a lot of questions about their case. And then we write out a detailed treatment plan comprising of the ideas that we're claiming will help them overcome whatever errors of thought or whatever distress that they've been going through. And if they like what we've written into the plan, then they're coming for 3, 4, 5, as many as 10, but seldomly as many as 10 sessions for us to take those ideas we've written into the plan and then to communicate them in such a way that our client can wrap their head around the ideas. And the state of hypnosis makes them more open to receive, more suggestible. So the ideas I articulate to my clients are seldomly completely new to them. So, for example, you're a living human being. You aren't just instrumental to other people's needs. Independently of them, you have your own thoughts, feelings, and hopes and desires, and they're just as valid as everyone else's. Okay, so this is not new to anyone in a liberal democracy, but sometimes we're treated otherwise. And when we're treated otherwise and we don't have validation that our existence matters, well, then to have someone else put some green check marks next to those thoughts that say, yes, you're a human being. Yes, your existence has value. Even when you're falling asleep, you're priceless. You're not worthless, right? So that's one option where it's private sessions, well planned out um, um, series. And we charge a couple $1,000s for the typical program of about 5 sessions. And I didn't get into this profession only to serve the affluent. So those private sessions are kind of subsidizing the one-to-many work that I do. And the longer I practice, the more I've been doing work one-to-many. At my old office, I had to just make recordings to put on YouTube. And that's how I could speak once and then benefit 500 people or 2,000 people. I moved into this new office space partly because what used to be an open concept office, I've converted into a classroom. And that classroom is, as far as I can tell, the only purpose-built, or at least the biggest purpose-built space on the planet for group hypnosis. So no windows facing the outside, very quiet, RGB lighting that's usually set very dimly, nice sound system, nice visual projections that we can put on the ceiling. It's basically set up for group hypnosis. And so for those who can't afford the private attention and care, um, if they do want to come weekly, it's much more affordable to sit among 5 other people who also can't sleep at night, or to sit among 14 other people who also weren't loved enough in childhood and now have to learn in adulthood how to love themselves. And like I said, if you go to your doctor, they can prescribe a medication, but that's not the same as learning how to love yourself. If you go to a therapist, you can vent about how you hate yourself, but the therapist, some will be directive. Some will say, "Well, think like this instead." But so many therapists, just because of their training and their modality and the paradigm they work under, they're very reluctant to like they feel arrogant unnecessarily by claiming authority over how someone else ought to think. So, yeah, so whether it's in the private setting where people pay me to think philosophically about their specific individual issue, or whether in a classroom setting where I'm thinking philosophically anyway, but about these broader societal issues, like why don't we love ourselves enough? Like how come so many people can't sleep at night? Um, it's because it works through verbal suggestion. Because I am talking either one to one or one to many. Um, this this is a replicable, scalable kind of practice. It's a little closer to a molecule for the brain, than it is to a dialogue that emerges between therapist and client.
Hmm. It's fascinating. Do you find that when you do the group work, that there are common themes with most of the people that are in the room? Is it really, it seems like it's anchoring on like limiting beliefs and stories that we tell ourselves and like that internal monologue, and you're just kind of helping them break free from like, you're not your past, that type of thing. Is that
Kind of. So everything you listed is like the problematic thinking that people seek to displace. My thoughts are not on debugging the spaghetti code, to use a programming term. My thoughts are on what's the ideal scripting for the client in their circumstances. And if it's a problem that I don't have, so let's say I'm a non smoker, right? Being a non smoker qualifies me to speak at length about how I take breaks as a non smoker, how I cope with distress as a non smoker, how I wake up in the morning and enjoy my coffee as a non smoker, right? I'm also not someone who's afraid of flying. So being a fearless flyer gives me plenty of life experience to speak from when I'm teaching someone else how also not to be a fearless flyer. So our society kind of often focuses on the problem. A lot of people don't go to the doctor until it hurts so badly that they can't avoid it. I'm very focused on the ideal thought processes, which cannot be found by investigating the psyches of, it can't easily be found by investigating the minds and the thought processes of people who have the problems that they have. So, yeah, so one theme is self love. It's how to be self loving. And it doesn't matter to me whether someone started hating themselves at the age of 5 or 15 or 50. The lesson for how to love yourself is the same. Let's say another night is insomnia. Well, 20 people in the room might be sleepless for 20 different reasons, but my guidance for how to relax at bedtime is still the same.
got it, got it, got it, got it.
Yeah, it's a very solution focused approach.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Is there obviously you got a huge heart and you want to help people, and I admire that about you. Um, how do you feel about the entertainment hypnotherapists? Um, like, is there like, how does that work? Like, is there mutual respect? Do they love what you're doing? Do they hate what you're doing? I'm just curious about that dynamic.
I do know a couple of entertainment hypnotists. That they are kind of a dying breed because it's not as popular to like humiliate people in front of an audience any longer, right? Maybe in the 80s, the 90s, it passed as fun family entertainment to humiliate
I
people.
mean, I remember like, I'm dating myself, but my freshman year in college, when was it? It was 1993, fall of 1993. And it was like the second week of college, and there was a hypnotist, and it was mortifying for the kids that ran out, the freshmen in college, and they're doing all this stuff. And that stuck with them for 4 years. Like, oh, yeah,
So for me, it was fall of 2000. Fall of 2000, my first week at U of T, they brought in a hypnotist, Mike Mandel. Um, so but, in the 2010s and the 2020s, I've been seeing less of that.
yeah.
So I try not to judge. Any practice that attracts an audience must attract an audience for reasons, for legitimate reasons. Um, so, I mean, one benefit of stage hypnosis is that it shows people our minds are much more capable of taking to new ideas quickly than we often estimate. So, if that hypnotist can get that person to quack like a duck after talking for 20 seconds, do you exactly? That is sort of a benefit of stage hypnosis where people swear up and down, I never would have done that except I was hypnotized. But then, of course, because the application is to have people accept bizarre ideas, which can only stick for a few minutes. Sometimes it makes people think that what I do is only going to be time limited, or what I do is to put people in fantasies where you're a dolphin swimming through a waterfall. But I actually seek to give people very grounded, rational ideas, the very same ideas I would want my niece and my nephews to have. You're an equal to others, and you can love yourself too, and that's additive.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a beautiful message, right? It's all like a very healing message. Is there have you can hypnosis access memories or emotions that people sort of consciously avoid? Like, you must see things bubble up with people, right?
Hypnosis does tend to disinhibit people, kind of like when you're falling asleep and you're in a dream. In dreamland, you're often confronting thoughts and feelings and memories that you find impermissible to confront when your faculties are fully online. So hypnosis isn't fully asleep, but it brings you a little bit closer to that dreamlike state where, with a few faculties offline, it is easier, or I guess you're more readily confronting the unacceptable or shameful thoughts or memories that normally you might have suppressed.
It's interesting to me because I think everything that I know about hypnosis, it just makes sense to me, right? It's kind of like, okay, that makes sense. Uh, How do you handle the perhaps preconceived notion from a heterosexual male? And I'm thinking I have two daughters that are teenagers. And, "Oh, yeah, I sent them to go see a hypnotherapist." Like, "Oh, wouldn't you be concerned, a young girl with a straight male hypnotherapist? That's scary." Um, I was watching last week, Chase, what's his name? He's on a podcast. I forget the guy's name. Great guy. And was mentioning that, the doctor had been arrested for, hypnotizing a woman that came in, and the only way that she figured it out was, like, her bra was askew. And she was like, "Wait, what's going on here?" And then she brought in a recorder. How do you um protect for that so that women feel safe in that environment?
There are hypnotists who would videotape the session, but then with like a videotape record of everything that they say and everything I said, then there's this privacy question. That's a whole ethical question. So earlier in my practice, I had more concern that people might make accusations, or that I might um, unnecessarily alarm people simply because of the gender I'm born into and the gender they're born into. The longer I practice, the more I realize that this is it is a little paranoid. It's not something that most people are afraid of. Now, maybe it helps that I do have full-time admin staff, and they're, like, on the other side of that wall, and they're the people, who greet our clients. They're the people who would check out the clients and take payment and do the bookings. So I do have admin staff, and usually they're women, um, right over there. I mean, it helps that I have a main street location. It's clearly a physical establishment where, like, the signage outside costs $6,000, $7,000. No one puts up a few $1,000s of signage and then plans to, like,
Yeah. Rough women that are coming in off the street. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like, it's obvious that I put care into the profession, and I think most people can surmise I'm not going to do something that ruins 19 plus years of reputation building for just something totally unnecessary. Of course, we permit our clients to bring a friend or a family member, and if our client is under 18, I mean, depending, so if they're 12, I want the parent present. 13, 14, probably the parent's going to be present. 15, 16, they can start to make their own choice whether they want the parent to be present. 17, 18, it's going to be the kid's choice. Do they want the parent present? But definitely, if any party wants the parent present, the parent's going to be present. And if they want to bring a friend, if my client's like an adult woman with a trauma history and they want to bring a friend or their spouse, feel free. We actually have 2 chairs there. Um, so I do believe sunlight's the best disinfectant. Shine a light on whatever the practice is, and that causes the roaches to scurry. I've kind of mixed my metaphors there, but
Get what you're saying?
yeah.
I knew it. That was going to be the answer. I feel like that's where everybody's mind goes to is like that you hear the horror stories and you're just like, oh boy, I would never.
There was a doctor in Toronto who was arrested for, I think, like, assaulting his clients, or maybe he lost his license, because you are right to think that in the state of hypnosis, even if you're not fully asleep, you've suspended some of your reasoning faculties, and there's going to be some compromise to your ability to remember everything that happened because it's an altered state that's a little closer to sleep. You don't remember all your dreams. You don't remember most of your dreams, and you don't think very clearly when you're actually asleep. So if hypnosis it's a half awake, half asleep state, and you're a little bit closer to sleep, then you don't have all your faculties online. That's part of the reason we do these written treatment plans, except in the group setting where there are other people present, or even if you happen to be the only one showing up for a group session, I've got my assistant in the other room looking through a glass window. It's not that she's going to witness me doing anything, but just the fact that someone could witness me doing something is, I think, reassuring. Um, yeah, so I've kind of lost my paranoia over the years. It's also kind of like, should a male teacher keep the door of the classroom open if talking one-on-one to a female student? Some male teachers choose to always keep the door open. Some male teachers might permit more privacy, but then they take that extra risk. I think we just each have to kind of, you know, conduct ourselves in a way that we're going to be okay with in the future.
Hmm. Do you typically, I'd imagine that people that are coming through your door, they're ready to transform. They're already like, I get it. I know what this can do for me. Do you ever have anybody come in that's just not believing that there's any sort of change that hypnosis can do for them?
Usually not to that degree of skepticism. Um, So occasionally, we're going to have an adolescent being dragged in by their parents or a spouse being dragged in by their spouse. And then we can tell immediately that that person will be putting the brakes on the entire time. And that's not a good experience for them or for us.
I'm curious, what are the things that they're coming in for? Like, what's an adolescent coming in for? Is it depression and like body image, self image? Like, I'm trying to think of like what are the things that kids are going through? Yeah.
If if the adolescent is suffering and they don't want to suffer, I have a very, very compliant client. But the kinds of things parents drag their kids in for are things like, I caught my kid smoking a joint. The kid's like, well, it was one joint. I don't smoke it every week. And then I'm thinking, okay, this is a parenting issue. This is a lack of the parent being a trustworthy adult. This is not a lack of hypnotherapy for the kid. Um, but where I do have compliant adolescent clients, I have one client who, because of neurodivergence, needs help fitting in better with her school. I have it. So a lot of what I'm doing with her is self-acceptance. So a big part of the message is you're not an inferior neurotypical. You're actually a perfectly fine example of yourself. Just like your neurotypical friends, they're not a lesser version of you. They're just wired differently, and that's the way they're born. And you were born the way that you were born, and you both have a place in your school. I have another kid who has severe insomnia, and they've tried everything else. So I've been helping him sleep better, to sleep more quickly, to feel safer falling asleep at night. I've had other adolescents with various phobias. The common theme to all of this is the child understands that they could be thinking more clearly, and they've asked for help thinking more clearly, and the parent concedes that they don't have the right words or the right ideas to convince their child that actually you can sleep or actually you belong at your school.
It is fascinating. I'd imagine, do you end up butting heads with like school psychologists, or do you find yourself being brought in by school psychologists saying to you as somebody that's going to put a bow on this for us?
Uh, Neither actually. In our treatment plans, we do include a line that says, if you have any doubts or concerns about this plan, please present this document to your therapist, to your spouse, to your family doctor, or to any other trusted advisor. And that's a way, where the psychologist doesn't even have to call me. They could just kind of look at what my plan is. And if they can approve of the plan, then maybe that happens without me even knowing about it. And I did have one instance where a high school had a budget to help their students who smoked stop smoking. So they thought that rather than bring in a boring speaker who no one's going to listen to, they were going to bring in a hypnotist to work with the few students who were smoking and wanted to stop smoking through hypnosis. So I did do a number of sessions at, I think it was a high school, not a middle school. I think it was a high school. And it would have been about 15 years ago when this prevalence of smoking was higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, but back then, I think you could even, like, smoke on patios. I think it was the time you could smoke in restaurants, but, it was a different time back then. Now it's vaping. Now it's, if people wanna quit vaping.
What's your success rate with that?
Yeah, so success rate, it's well, our clients aren't signing up for a research study, so I can only give you the numbers I can give to you. And keep in mind, they're not scientific. Um, so 4 weeks after a client finishes their program, we send an email or we make a phone call and we ask, How are they doing?" And we broadly class everyone under, are they happy? Like, do they self assess a satisfactory outcome, or do they self assess a negative outcome? I haven't run the numbers recently for smoking specifically, but usually it's about 85% a self assess a positive outcome on a 4-week follow up. Yeah, but think of it like this. If I were a piano teacher, if I were a driving instructor, and I follow up with my students after they've taken like a few grades of piano instruction or a few in-car driving lessons, and I ask, are you playing the piano better? Are you driving better? I mean, you're gonna see like 85% of people are gonna be playing because I take this educational approach where I'm teaching people how to think ideally, and then I leave nothing to chance. I'm not leaving it to them to figure out how to be relaxed or how to sleep better. I'm telling them, here's what works for so many other people. Try it on, see if it works for you. The yeah, the few people who report a negative outcome, I wonder if they're choosing not to think as I've guided them to. I wonder if they've, whether carelessly or just out of defiance, they're, you know, they have.
Yeah, so people like that. I mean, the most honest conversation I remember talking to a cousin once, and I was like, "How come you haven't stopped smoking?" And his response was, "I'm not ready yet." And some people just, they know they shouldn't be, but they're just like, I'm not there yet. I'll be there."
But it also kind of answers the concern about, is this mind control? Can I make people do things they don't want to do? And the answer is categorically no. I cannot make people do things they don't want to do. I can give instruction, I can verbally suggest, and that's about the limitation of my power.
There standard operating procedures that like the tools that you give people once you're completed working with them, meaning like, look, uh, this is what you can do for yourself each night before you go to bed. And are there standard patterns to that. I'd imagine that it'd be like breath work, meditation. Like, what does that look like? Say you go on your own, but do these things in order to sustain the change that we've implemented.
It's a plan B. And here's why. When I look at people who are relaxed and happy and confident, who sleep well at night, for example, or even if I examine myself in my 20s versus now my 40s, I'm relaxed now not because I've perfected my breathing exercises. I'm relaxed now because I see myself as an equal to others. And I believe whatever's over the horizon, I can handle it. And I know that I have intrinsic worth even if I fail to handle what's over the horizon. And as everyone else's peer, I can just get myself back up again and try again the next day, just like anyone else can. It's a worldview that keeps me grounded and relaxed and confident. It's not exercises. So, plan A is to give my client these kinds of worldviews that ideally we all got from our parents and teachers in elementary school, but in the real world, we sometimes had to go out of our way to get adulthood from, if not self help books or philosophy, you know, I if not meditating by a lake or taking psychedelics in a forest. A hypnotherapist is someone who could help you gain this kind of clarity. So plan A is I make my points well enough, and then they're realized well enough that they don't need to hear these points from me again. So, like, I'm not going back to any worldview where I feel like I'm intrinsically anyone's inferior, right? Once I kind of internalize this liberal democratic egalitarianism, this is clearly how most people think. This is how most people already see me. This is the worldview I'm keeping, and there's a 0% chance I'm gonna, like, buy into the weird authoritarian idea that some people are born superior. Um, so I try to give my clients this kind of certainty where it's kind of like when you're certain that 2 plus 2 will always be 4, you don't need your grade 2 teacher to keep reminding you. When you're certain that a certain maneuver does a 3-point turn, well, you don't need your driving instructor verbalizing the process for a 3-point turn when you've done it yourself a million times. And when you're certain that you're definitely an adult, so, you can handle what adults can handle, and if you can't handle it, well, no other adult can handle that situation anyway. Like, these kinds of things. You're gonna see these views validated by daily experience. So plan A is within whatever number of visits, they've internalized, uh, how capable they are, how worthy they are, how equal they are. And then, well, when they see it and hear it regularly, they don't need me to say it, and they don't need to do breathing exercises or affirmations or meditation exercises. I see those techniques as kind of a plan B because less happy people tend to do those things to become happier. Happy people just have a worldview that, you know, give them a lens where they see what is good and right to begin with.
Fascinating. You're doing good work in the world. What so my next question was about anxiety and what that's trying to communicate, but I'm going to put a little wrinkle to that because I wonder if and I'm sure it's happened at some point throughout the course of your practice, you've perhaps uncovered like real trauma that somebody is sort of really suppressed in their subconscious mind. You don't have to divulge what you've uncovered, but I'm just curious, how do you as a professional that has this, you know, legitimate business that's been around for many, many years, what is your process in handling that for your patients?
Right. So, I'll just use an example like having been kidnapped as a child, right? So that's come up a couple of times as an example of a severe trauma, right? See, and it's almost never repressed. So usually people who've been kidnapped as children, they know they were kidnapped as children. It's part of their life story. It's part of the ways they see themselves, and then they suffer for it. So here's my universal kind of prescription for someone who has PTSD. You can breathe and deeply. because there is nothing imminent to hold your breath for. And you can relax as you in your body right now, in this universe here, because there is no impact to brace for. And you can even permit yourself to feel safe where your own senses assess that you're safe because those senses don't deceive you. Where you see you're safe, your eyes give you truth. Where you hear you're safe, your ears give you truth. Where in your assessment, there is no threat that you could see or hear or feel, your brain is working correctly and you're out of the woods. You're in the clear. You'll never be that helpless, vulnerable, unknowing child again. So that's kind of like a mini script where, like, let's say that inadvertently I said something and it's brought up memories of a childhood kidnapping. I would say exactly that. Or if it's a natural disaster, I would say exactly that. Or if they're a first responder and they came across a very gruesome scene, I would say exactly that. That's like my universal prescription, but because it kind of speaks to the core of PTSD, where you're still bracing for impacts that don't come. You're still holding your breath as though a bad thing's going to happen when no bad thing is imminent. So a lot of what I'm doing is I'm actually describing my client in the moment, and I'm describing the world around them, so that having like by hearing me articulate what I've seen first, they can turn in that direction and see it second after me, and they know they're not crazy because I've seen it first, I've articulated. They're not crazy for feeling safe. They're not crazy for breathing deeply. They're not crazy for letting their muscles relax if indeed there's no impact to brace for.
Love that because it's anchored in reality. Like, hey, you're you're safe.
So the question kind of like started with anxiety and then it turned into PTSD. But so I'm convinced if every one of us were very clear about here's what's definitely real, here's what is concretely and materially real, and here is what's definitely imagined. It might happen, but it's definitely imagined. If all of us had that kind of epistemic clarity, that this is reality and this is, not reality, but we can imagine it anyway, we would have much less anxiety. A lot of anxiety is when we kind of like blur what's imagined and we react to what's imagined as though it's real. Um, so we're anxious not because of what is, but because of what could be, what might be, or what if.
Yeah, beautiful. It's almost so simple. Why can't we all do that? It's like when we live in the past and relive it. It's like why? It's not. That's not reality, and this is reality.
It's kind of like the injunction to be in the present moment. Very easy to say, but can take a lifetime to actually manage.
Yeah, really difficult, right? Stay locked into that moment and not let your monkey brain take control. So I love that we went from anxiety into PTSD because I'm curious. Um, there's all sorts of research about microdosing and psychedelics assisting with PTSD recovery. Does your practice work with that, or do you not? There's no outside substance that you're using whatsoever. Are you investigating that? Is that something that you've done yourself? I'm just curious whether that's part of it.
Well, the quote from Salvador Dali comes to mind. I don't do drugs. I am. So, hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness. It's kind of mind expanding. So, typically, someone who's hypnotized, they're going to feel like time passes differently. They might feel their body is immobile. It's some of my clients who are experienced with drugs have described it as psychedelic. So, hypnosis is an altered state. If the client were to use drugs or alcohol before the session, they can't have confidence that it was their own thought processes that produced the altered state. It could be the molecule in their brain, and then like sure, cool, but then they're dependent on the molecule. They're not dependent on their own thoughts. And the reason to hire me is so I can give you the kinds of thoughts that produce a more happy, confident, relaxed you.
I love that. That's a great answer because it's like it's got to be more empowering. It's like, well, I can't walk around on DMT all the time, right? Like I've got to be able to handle reality.
Well, so many people come here to quit smoking, to stop drinking alcohol, to stop eating junk food because they don't know how to use their thoughts to feel good. And then when I teach them to use their own thoughts for self love and self acceptance and self respect and moral clarity and epistemic clarity, well, cigarettes are pretty lousy relative to all of that. Junk food isn't very good or appealing compared to all of that.
I love it. It's got to be very empowering for people that don't realize just how impactful their own mind can be, right? Like,
Knowledge is knowledge is power. So the human condition, it's not that we're born perfect and therefore if we're distressed, we must have broken along the way. No, that's not the human condition. The human condition is we are born into ignorance. We are born knowing nothing. We don't know how to drive a car. We don't know how to socialize. We don't know how to make friends. We don't know how to avoid bullies. We learn all of this along the way. If we're lucky, then in childhood, we learn how to become happy, confident, relaxed adults. Very few of us are that lucky because as we go through the school system, we learn how to criticize ourselves. We learn how to second guess ourselves. We learn how to subjugate our own opinions to the opinions of teachers and parents. And that might be adaptive to a childhood environment, but eventually you become an adult and then you're a peer to parents and teachers. And then it's adaptive to value your own thoughts again, to value your own opinions. If you're like at the forefront of your industry, or you're a research scientist, or you're a lawyer or a physician, you absolutely have to value your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own opinions, your own ethics
fascinating.
as an adult.
Really interesting perspective on it. I'd imagine that you probably are using the same thought process on helping people discover why they sort of self-sabotage when they come in terms of like success and things like that.
Interestingly enough, so it's kind of like what I said earlier about how I can have 20 people in the same room hearing the same message. I don't care to find out how did they become the way they are. I just care more about how should they be thinking ideally. The thought processes that lead to self-sabotage don't actually contain too much information for how to fulfill your own goals and how to respect yourself enough that you're taking care of yourself on the long timeline of one human life. So I am, maybe you might say, you know, superlatively or extremely solution focused, but I am solution focused because I do believe that, well, one, the people are not getting that from their therapists and doctors. And two, if my objective is to get someone to the point of not suffering as quickly as possible, then, well, why debug the spaghetti code that I'm going to erase anyway if I can just copy and paste or like do a git pull from code that actually works? I'll use a less nerdy analogy. So I'm writing this book called Undoing Freud: How the Lost Art of Hypnotism Can Save Our Mental Health. Um, eh, l- Thank you. One of the lines from this book is this: if Sigmund Freud had become a music teacher instead of a physician, he might have made a career out of watching his students flail helplessly in front of instruments they were never shown how to play. So I notice you have guitars on your wall there, Chris. Imagine you hire a guitar teacher and he just asks, how do you feel about your inability to play the guitar?
Pretty bad.
Yes. Let's investigate how you got to this point where you have no idea how to play your guitar. Well, that's not how you teach someone how to do anything. You have to teach them, okay, here's how you hold the guitar. Here's how you fret a chord. Here's how you strum. Here's how you read the tabs. Here's how you read the music. You don't even have to ask, how do you get to this point of ignorance? Because ignorance is the state we're all born into. you go right to here's how to do it properly. So that's why I don't think it's like extremely solution focused. I think it's appropriately solution focused.
Yeah, I dig your approach, man. I think it's like and it's not the first time it's come up on this podcast, like how Freud was like, "That's a mess. That it's not the right approach." Uh, Adler, like Adlerian thought, like psychology seems to be much more embraced in this day and age where people are kind of like, why are we lamenting about the things we can't change? Let's worry about the things that we can change and control.
See, it's CBT as well, cognitive behavioral therapy. But even these therapies that are known to be directive, like CBT is known to be directive. But I've been through years of CBT from the client side, and I still had to figure out everything myself because my therapist gave me the questions and wanted me to arrive at the answers. Or he gave me a framework and he wanted me to fill in the framework myself. Hypnotherapy, at least the way that I've been talking about, this is directive in a way that's off the charts to the realm of a whole different profession than psychotherapy. Because a session has me talking almost nonstop for 45, 50, 55 minutes, straight up telling people, do this, notice yourself relaxing, think this, notice how you're relaxing, think this, think that, think. I'm just telling people, think like this, and then some of what I say is going to stick with them and benefit them. And, usually after a few hours of listening to here's how to think ideally, the client can take it from there. And that's because I'm not depending on them to arrive at these ideal thoughts. I am straight up verbalizing these ideal thoughts. Now, Freud was actually trained by but by a few hypnotists, but two of them were heading up their schools of thought. One of them is Hippolyte Bernheim, and the other was Jean-Martin Charcot. So Charcot, these were all physicians. In the 1800s, all hypnotists were physicians. But this was before medicine, like before psychopharmacology. So hypnosis was one of the tools that physicians in France in the 1800s would use to try to alleviate the suffering of their patients. So Charcot believed that you had to be, quote, hysterical to be hypnotizable. And then when you're hypnotized, you catharsis out the psychopathology, right? You get it out, you uproot it from the roots, and it's no longer inside your psyche after you catharsis out your hysteria. I've kind of oversimplified, but that's generally the model. Heim believed that everyone can be hypnotized because it doesn't work through catharsis of a psychopathology. It works through verbal suggestion. If the physician is the wiser mentor in the room, the physician verbalizes ideas that they suggest to the patient. The patient then listens to these ideas verbalized by the physician, and that's how the ideas are transmitted from the physician's mind into the patient's mind. Now, these are very contradicting paradigms, right? So, like, who does most of the talking? And are we getting ideas out of people's heads, or are we putting ideas into people's head? You can't choose both paradigms at the same time. Freud went with Charcot. So that's why psychoanalysis has so much free association, right? That's why the psychoanalyst sits off to the side out of view. That's why the psychoanalyst quietly takes notes, occasionally prompts, and doesn't say very much, because the patient has to let it all out, uninterrupted by the practitioner. And then it's anathema for the practitioner to dominate the entire session with their ideas for how how happy, relaxed, non-hysterical person ought to think. But it's Freud's uh, uh, abandonment of this particular kind of hypnosis that kind of, it set back hypnosis a lot, like by 125 years. Um, if things had gone different historically, it would be a normal thing to hire a psychologist to tell you what to think. Now, no one imagines their psychologist has the the arrogance, the chutzpah to tell you what to.
But it is interesting though. I mean, it's kind of like it, it just makes sense. Like I've never really heard it said this bit. Like what you're saying makes so much sense because we all know that when we could break our negative inner monologue and we can kind of override it with meditation and reprogram our own brain. When I first started meditating 15 years ago, I remember there was a meditation. It was like, I'm whole, I am happy, I am, what was it? I'm perfect, I'm whole, I'm happy. Like he was just, and it was just reiterating that. And then I was just trying to imagine, a rose in my head, trying to spin it and just that activity. And I was like, that's what I was taught the first time I'd meditated. Like it changed my mood. I'd get off the train, I'd do what I was commuting. I'd be like, well, we're in a great mood. I'm like, oh, I told myself to be in a great mood. Like I just kind of reprogrammed it. And I've never really heard hypnosis articulated in the manner with which you just did, because I think deep down, subconsciously, as well as consciously, we all know that we can be very influenced by the words that we hear in our environment. And if why not insert some positive stuff in? Hey, like while you're
Now that I've taken some shots at one major Western historical philosopher, let me take a few shots at another one. So, I mean, most of what Descartes did was smart and valid, but hi- so Cartesian dualism, the, the dualism between mind and body that has pervaded the Western world and Western medicine is in a large way to be blamed. Why we even believe we could think whatever we like in our heads with no impact to our bodies. Without dualism, it'll be completely nonsensical. You could think whatever you like, and there's no impact to your body, right? If we're one organism, right? If mind and body are just, like two sides of one coin, then of course, like the way you pose yourself will affect how you feel, and then the way you think affects your body. Of course, you're one organism,
makes
not like
sense.
two separate things.
Yeah. And then if you go a step further and you're like, if you really examine us, we're just energy. It's like, well, it's one energy field. So if you're feeding that energy field positive energy, then it's going to become more positive. I mean, it just makes sense. It does make sense. Like on a base oversimplified level, because I'm a meathead and I'm trying to interpret all the smart things that you're saying. So how much responsibility should the clients take for their own healing? Like, do you give clients homework assignments? You say, look, between now and our next session, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Is that, it sounds like that's got to be part of the program, right?
Well, I permit my clients to record their sessions on their own devices. So basically, they'll leave the session with a bootleg of of what I did with them. And sometimes I'll use my own equipment to record a session, but then I'm kind of like half distracted by this at the same time I'm talking to the client. So I just kind of prefer to give them like an output from a mixing board, and they'll just plug in their own phone. And so for clients who really want homework, and it's not every client, but for clients who really want homework, they can bootleg a session and listen to it until the session seems unnecessarily redundant. And for some people, after leaving, it'll be unnecessarily redundant to get the same lesson. For some people, after 2 or 3 lessons, it becomes unnecessarily redundant to hear, "You're a human being, you're an adult," and they wanna hear something that iterates and builds on top of that. So,
Right. I mean,
m
okay, that's cool. I'm I'm gonna go in a different direction right now, because as you're saying all these things and we're both agreeing, because it just makes sense, right? Like, yeah, the things that you hear, the things that you're implanting in your own brain, whether that be externally, whether that be your own internal monologue, it impacts your body, your outlook on life. How many times have you, as a grown man, been scrolling through social media or listening to the news, and you just go, "Oh yeah, they're hypnotizing us. They're do we've all seen now the sort of meme of when there's one message and all of a sudden you see 50 news networks reading the same exact prompts that are coming across the screen. Like, how else do you comment on that? Or do you want to comment on that?
So I don't see hypnosis as in a different class of activity as other forms of communication. So I was talking with a prospective student yesterday, and prospective students, they sometimes imagine that look like I have a power, and they wonder whether they have the same power. So I tell them this: with no preparation and no script, you can comfort someone on the subway who's crying, let's say because someone shouted a slur at them, right? You have enough morality, enough moral clarity, and enough words that with zero preparation, you can bring some clarity and peace and comfort to someone who got yelled at in a subway car. So that's what I'm tapping into when I'm doing hypnosis. Um, and that's communication. It's taking the ideas in my head and the feelings or sentiments in my head and, using good enough words, probably not perfect words, but good enough words delivered in a good enough way that I get the point across and it enters someone else's mind and it makes sense to them. So the essence of hypnosis is effective communication. And I guess news networks have also perfected the art of effective communication, getting a point across in like a 2-minute segment, moving on 24 hours later. So the study of hypnosis, it's the study of communication. I was an English major, as you know, and that turned out to be rather good preparation or education.
There Yes, the degree that you said wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, but like the university did promise, I would learn to think and communicate for a living, and that has value. They basically implied I can totally monetize thinking and communicating, but they were right, right? Because like most of what we do, whether you're a news anchor or whether you're a hypnotherapist or you're a project manager, or whether you're an executive, a politician, a lawyer, you're thinking and you're communicating.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So what do you think is the difference between, it sounds like you're in the business of liberating minds, right? Like you're in the business of kind of like cleaning it out and saying, look, these are the things that we're doing. What's the difference between that and controlling one? Like, can you see the difference? Like when.
So it's several differences. Um, so when I do group sessions, um, because I can't attend to individual experiences, I literally tell them that I'm kind of like I'm kind of like an instructor, and all I can do is talk. And when the words leave my mouth, I've done my part. It's when you hear me and then you do something with what I've said that these words have any power within you at all, right? So I tell them, if you have to sneeze, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to stop you. If you self-assess you have to sneeze, go ahead and just try to do it in like, into an elbow. If you have to use the washroom, you don't have to ask permission. It's your body. It's your bladder. Just like use the washroom if you have to. So some people kind of like approach what I do as though I'm like some tyrannical dictator. And I'm actually very much the opposite. I actually hope everyone becomes so self-mastered and so well-disciplined that I never have to tell anyone anything. Like, my ideal of utopia is everyone controls themselves.
Me in the business and I'll be happy, right? Yeah, it is interesting. I feel like, finish your thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so one other analogy is it's kind of like the control that a driving instructor has over the driving student. Now, I'll use a real life example. My first driving instructor put me off driving for well over a decade. So, my first driving instructor, maybe he specializes in teaching adolescents, I don't know, but he had that bar, at the bottom of the, like the footwell where he can press the brakes, and then sometimes he would, like, reach across. and he'll turn the wheel if he thought I was gonna veer out of the lane. So I'm 16, I'm trying to drive, and suddenly the brakes come on. And sometimes, like, he'll grab the wheel, and it's impossible for me to learn how to control a motor vehicle if I don't have control motor vehicle. Uh, yeah, and so it put me off driving for well over a decade. And then I hired a different instructor at the age of 30. He didn't have that device where he could press the brakes. He never touched the wheel. His car did have a big dent in the side, right? So some other student apparently couldn't keep the car in the lane. But I mean, he's got a sense of humor about that. So all he used were his words. You know, you're veering into the lane. Try this, do this, do that. He was a far, far better instructor for having zero control over the vehicle that's supposed to be mine to control. So, in doing hypnotherapy as much as possible, in fact, just to be realistic, like, so something I say is there's a mind body connection. There's no hypnotist to body connection. Isn't like that brake from the passenger seat that I can press. All I have are my words. I am like the second driving instructor, where if I use my words well and the client is listening and they want to be able to control their own feelings better, their own attention better, or their thought processes better, then we have two people working together to help them think more clearly or more joyfully or more
But
peacefully.
it's a great analogy, really great analogy that I don't think a lot of people think about when they're, thinking about their mental health, that they kind of have to do it on their own, but it's, you can't force them to really do anything. So what, I mean, you must, in your own practice, must see these patterns in human nature. Like, what is something about these animals that you wish more people understood?
Human beings?
Yeah.
Um, so, well, I guess I hate to admit this, but the older I get, the more conservative I get. And previously, I would kind of look at systemic factors, reasons to excuse my client from the life that they have, reasons to excuse my client from the suffering that, sometimes they brought upon themselves. The older I get, the more I realize that there is merit to the idea of personal responsibility. I sound like a fuddy-duddy here, but there is so much merit to the idea that you can, if not like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you you you're never totally helpless. You're never totally a victim. Have should see so much autonomy in adulthood. Now, it's not that you have total agency. Like I can't will myself to become Elon Musk. Even if I try hard, there is a factor of luck. I wasn't born with like emerald miner parents. There is luck involved, but um I've well, if if we're going to seek to emulate the successful, right? So if we want to be happy, we want to be healthy, we want to be prosperous, we want to have good lives, we want to have good relationships, well, then we have to emulate the successful. We have to look at, well, how do they think? What choices do they make? And I think a lot of people are emulating their worst teachers or their parents in their least resourced moments. And they're not emulating in their heads the best teachers who got the best from them, or they're not emulating their parents in their best resourced moments. I mean, you can look at any pair of parents and you find moments worth emulating and other moments no bad at all. To be like every generation has to be selective about what are they going to take from what they witnessed previously in life and perpetuate it upon future generations.
Yeah. And what patterns are they going to actually break and be, okay with breaking? So I'm going to give you a chance to brag a little bit. Like, what's the biggest shifts that you've seen happen through your work? And I'm curious, like, what's the biggest personal shift that you've experienced through your work? It sounds like you've done a lot of, from where I sit, it sounds like you were, partially healing yourself by getting into this line of work. It sounds like it's helped you a great deal by knowing that you're doing good in the world, right? And, tell me about those two shifts, your own personally and like some incredible shifts that you've helped facilitate.
Yeah, I can definitely speak more about my own personal life just because I've observed it for 43 years. Whereas my clients might engage for like 5 sessions, 10 sessions over a few months or over like maybe 1 year in total. Um, but you're absolutely right that when I'm thinking on behalf of my clients to help them develop moral clarity or epistemic clarity or more peace or other best practices for how one might think in this world, I have to like try it on myself. So I never say anything to my clients that I don't actually believe in myself. Um, so, it's why my hypnosis sessions don't have people flying through forests and, turning into dolphins and swimming through waterfalls. It's you're a living human being because I can say that and I mean it and I believe it. It's in a liberal democracy, you're an equal to the men and women of this world. I can say that and it's totally authentic. And I think people hear the authenticity because I totally believe it. You're an adult, right? If I see my client is over the age of 18, I can say, you're an adult. Your vote counts equally. So, hearing myself say this over and over again, and also having to kind of like ground myself so I can observe and then articulate these observations. Obviously, if I'm like the instrument that the hypnosis comes through, then I get shaped by what my clients need. So, as someone else who's also a modern human being living in 2025 in a big city, I personally benefit from the things I say to my clients because I'm also of a similar demographic as them. I'm certainly of the same species as them and living in the same year as them. And where there's overlap, I definitely benefit. Um, in the past, when I've gone through depressive episodes, um, going to work and thinking about other people's problems and then articulating to them some ideal thoughts and then seeing they're a little better off because they heard me speak. That had a profound antidepressant effect.
Oh, I can imagine. Sure, man.
Compared to, like, lying in bed and canceling my day,
Yeah.
it's far better oops, it's far better to show up and to do this kind of work, and, one of the benefits of hypnotherapy is because my verbal suggestions guide the entire experience, almost universally, people are feeling better at the end, right? So it's not like if you take a psychedelic, we don't know if it's gonna be a good trip or a bad trip. If you do trauma therapy, we don't know what's gonna come up. Well, I know by the end of the session, my client's breathing more deeply, they're more muscularly relaxed, and they've heard some matters of fact that are life-affirming and empowering. I know that because that's what I'm gonna verbalize when they sit in front of me. So that's how I've personally benefited. It's hard to think of some client cases, but probably because, like, I have, like, no long-term client. Uh,
But I do think, look, I mean, I think it's beautiful what you just spoke of. And I think everybody's gone through depressive episodes, and what a gift that you can kind of work yourself through it by helping others, right? Like, we all kind of know in our wiring that that's part of the biggest joy in life is, bringing joy to others. And it sounds like, you get a pretty immediate feedback loop, which is, kind of wonderful, right?
it really affirms we're all members of the same species. Because, like, I am not of the same gender as most of my clients. I am not of the same race as most of my clients. I am not of the same age as most of my clients. I'm not of the same occupation as most of my clients. The thing that I have in common with every single one of my clients is we are all human beings. And there's so much in this overlapping middle of the Venn diagram between human beings that speaking to this, that's where you can find what's empowering and liberating and comforting. If we look at the thin edges of that Venn diagram, I'm a man, she's a woman, how could I understand her? Or I'm a hypnotherapist, they're a lawyer. How could I help them relax? If I'm looking at the thin edges, I'm totally unresourced, but unnecessarily because the commonalities are abundant in that middle of the Venn diagram. And I'm going to blame Freud again for for in some ways how society's become so atomized because in a psychotherapy room you're looking at what the individual thinks, what the one individual has been through, what the one individual wants, the one individual's values. So you're looking at the thin edges of the Venn diagram. But for me to be able to make one recording and it's listened to 2,000 people and it's going to benefit all 2,000, or for me to speak to a classroom with 20 people, I have to speak to the giant overlapping middle of the Venn diagram, but there's so much to be mined there that I think is often overlooked because we're looking at the thin edges. A lot of people, feel um, even living in the middle of a city with millions of people, they feel very alone because, oh, well, that person looks cooler than me. That person's better dressed than no. You're a human. They're a human. You can talk. You're a neighbor, they're a neighbor, you can talk. You're a colleague, they're a colleague, you can talk.
Such a beautiful message. I feel as if, look, maybe you're the hypnotherapist that gets on big stages that doesn't make it into a dog and pony show. I feel as if, well, there should be people like you on stage, given the depth and breadth of, an hour and change to explain what you just explained, right?
Yeah, well, so I'm finishing my second decade in this profession. My first decade, I was just learning the ropes and finding my way and trying to make it commercially viable. The second decade, so it's my 19th year in practice. The second decade, I've been finding my own voice. The written treatment plans, for example, that's something we're doing that I'm still not seeing other practices do. As I look at year 20 and beyond, the third decade, where now I have an established practice, now I have a unique voice, that's where I want to bring it to more of a mass market. So, hence interviews like this, hence my own podcast, hence, raising my fees to the private clients and then delegating more to some associates and doing more in a group format. Because with only 7 days in a week, well, I have to kind of start turning away from client work a little bit to be able to complete the book that I've started and to be able to, maybe one day do a TED talk. But you're right. I this,
Good, man. I mean, that's where my head went. I was like, we need you on that red dot, because it is important. And I think your message, you surprised me. I wasn't expecting that this was going to be the message. And it's, essentially like, hey, we're all human beings here. And there's, what I'm extracting from the conversation is that there are many similarities between the depression and anxiety and issues that we all have. And that there are a couple of pretty, accessible things that we could do in order to alleviate some of that pain that we're going through. I think it's really interesting. And I think what rewarding work that you must be doing. My goodness. When's the new book coming out? Do you know, or you're working on it right now? I'm curious.
I'm working on it. Well, I wrote a few chapters in a weekend, and then I haven't touched it for about a year. So, when I say I'm writing a book, I mean I've begun it. It I the first step is to delegate more work to free up, like, maybe 1 day a week. Need to research and because if I'm gonna take down Freud, I know other authors have, taken shots at Freud, but if I'm gonna contribute originally to the anti-Freud literature, then I want this well-researched. I want it well-argued, and, I don't want it to be too easy for an academic to say, "Well, I don't know what I'm talking about." So I'm taking a lot of time with this.
Well, that's smart. Well, then I suppose when you finally get around to it, I'd love to have you back on the podcast because I've been pleasantly surprised. I think your message is beautiful. I think your practice is important, and I think much more important than I had previously conceived. Man, I'm really, really thrilled that we had this opportunity to talk and for you really to educate me about what you do and to take it much more seriously. Right? I'm sure that you encounter that where people kind of roll their eyes if they hear it. Um, how can people get in touch with you? They want to work with you in Toronto, and how can they maybe download some of your online stuff and interact with you that way?
Yeah, thank you. If your listeners are in Toronto or if they want to do online sessions anywhere else in the world, they can contact my office, which is the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis. Morpheus clinic.com is the website. If they want to listen to me on a recording, they can go to my YouTube channel at Morpheus Hypnosis. I also have an app called Hypno. It's in the Play Store on Android and the App Store on Apple devices, and all of my recordings are free. So you'll have to sign in, but anything that says it's done by Luke Chow is on the free side of the paywall. The paid side of the paywall is if you want access to like a dozen, 20 other hypnotists, then that's an option. But for me, I make most of my income through doing private sessions. So for me, the app is it's a fancy business card. It's for people who kind of want to dip their toes into the water.
Well, it's cool because I want to dip my toes in the water and I'm going to download the app. That's awesome.
Please do, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm more than happy to speak to your audience about modern hypnotherapy and why it's sometimes unfairly maligned, and what actually goes on in a professional hypnosis office these days.
It's great stuff, man. Thanks for coming on, and we're definitely going to have you on again. And keep up the good work. You're doing very cool stuff, man. Helping a lot of people. That's awesome. Thanks so much for watching the Quantum Shift podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, comment, and share.